The intergalactic trade station, Lumina Prime, was alive with noise and activity. Aliens of all shapes, sizes, and colors bustled about, shouting deals, exchanging strange currencies, and showcasing goods that ranged from glowing crystals to bubbling liquids in floating orbs. Among them was Invalic, a towering Vrexian bounty hunter known for his deadly efficiency. His scales shimmered dark green, and his four glowing eyes scanned the crowd with practiced precision. He had no time for nonsense. Until today. "Excuse me, sir," a small voice piped up from behind. Invalic turned, his imposing figure towering over a human, soft, pink-skinned, and carrying a backpack that seemed far too large for his slim frame. The human's messy brown hair and wide grin were at odds with the grim surroundings. "What do you want?" Invalic growled, his voice like grinding rocks. The human extended a hand. "Jacob, I heard you're looking for an assistant. I'm perfect for the job." Invalic blinked all four eyes, then laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that startled a passing merchant. "You? An assistant? You wouldn't last a day." Jacob didn't flinch. He stood there, grinning. "I may not look like much, but I'm great at fixing things, reading maps, and not dying. That's a useful skill, right?" Invalic shook his head, amused. "I work alone, little human. It's safer that way." "Safer for you or me," Jacob quipped. For reasons he couldn't explain, Invalic found himself hesitating. Something about the human's confidence, no, his stubborn optimism, was oddly intriguing. Against his better judgment, Invalic muttered, "Fine. One mission. If you get in my way, you're gone." Jacob pumped his fist in the air. "Yes. You won't regret this, big guy." Their first mission together was a simple one, tracking down a petty thief who had stolen a rare Vrexian artifact. The trail led them to the station's darker underbelly, where flickering lights and the hum of malfunctioning machinery set a tense mood. "You sure you can handle this?" Invalic asked, his tone dripping with doubt. "Absolutely," Jacob replied, pulling out a small scanner. It beeped, and he pointed down a shadowy corridor. He went that way. Invalic raised an eyebrow. "Not bad, human." They crept forward, the air growing colder. Suddenly, a shadow darted out of an alley. Invalic charged after it, his movements swift and precise. Jacob, on the other hand, tripped over a loose cable and landed face-first on the floor. "Ow," he muttered, getting back up. By the time Jacob caught up, Invalic had pinned the thief against the wall, the artifact glowing faintly in his claws. "Got him," Invalic growled. "Nice work," Jacob said, dusting himself off. As they headed back, Invalic couldn't help but glance at his new companion. Sure, the human was clumsy and naive, but there was something oddly endearing about him. Maybe, just maybe, this partnership wouldn't be so bad. Lumina Prime's bustling market was behind them as Invalic guided his small ship, the Iron Fang, into hyperspace. Jacob, sitting in the co-pilot's seat, stared out at the swirling blue light of the warp tunnel with wide-eyed wonder. "This never gets old," Jacob said, grinning like a child. Invalic grunted, adjusting the ship's controls. "Focus, human. We're heading to Kalen IV. There's a buyer for the artifact we recovered. Don't touch anything." Jacob leaned back, hands raised in mock surrender. "Got it. No touching. I'm just here to keep you company." The ship dropped out of hyperspace, revealing Kalen IV, a planet of shimmering green oceans and jagged white mountains. As they approached the surface, Invalic reviewed the mission. "The buyer is a Ralith named Charon. They're a collector of rare items, not someone to cross. Stay quiet and let me handle the negotiation," Invalic instructed. "Quiet. Got it," Jacob said, though his tone was anything but reassuring. The meeting took place in a dimly lit chamber filled with glowing relics. Charon, a tall, snake-like alien with jewel-encrusted scales, hissed in delight as Invalic presented the artifact. "A masterpiece. Charon exclaimed, the artifact's faint glow reflecting in their multifaceted eyes. "Tell me, Hunter, where did you find this?" "Classified," Invalic replied curtly. While the two negotiated, Jacob's gaze wandered to the artifacts around the room. One piece caught his attention, a small circular device with intricate symbols etched on its surface. It was pulsing faintly, almost as if it were alive. Before he could think twice, Jacob reached out and brushed his fingers across it. The device sprang to life, projecting a glowing hologram of a star map. "Ah, Invalic," Jacob called hesitantly. Both Charon and Invalic turned, their eyes widening at the sight of the hologram. "What did you do, human?" Invalic barked. "I just touched it," Jacob stammered. Charon's demeanor shifted instantly. They lunged forward, their voice sharp. "That is no ordinary artifact. It's a key to the lost vault of Eternum, a treasure trove of ancient technology." Invalic grabbed Jacob's arm, pulling him behind him protectively. "This wasn't part of the deal, Charon." Charon's eyes gleamed with greed. "I'll pay double for the human. His kind have a unique affinity for activating ancient devices. He's priceless." "No deal," Invalic growled, his claws flexing. Realizing they were no longer safe, Invalic shoved the artifact into his bag and signaled for Jacob to run. The two bolted out of the chamber, with Charon's guards hot on their heels. As they raced back to the ship, Jacob couldn't help but gasp. "Why does everyone want me all of a sudden?" Invalic didn't answer until they were safely aboard the Iron Fang and back in hyperspace. "Because, human," Invalic said, glancing at Jacob with a rare expression of concern, "you're more valuable than you realize. And now, everyone knows it." Jacob gulped, suddenly understanding that their adventure had just begun. The Iron Fang hummed steadily as it approached Daxia 5, a sprawling industrial planet known for its endless urban sprawl and shadowy underworld. Invalic guided the ship to a secluded docking bay, his four glowing eyes scanning the control panels with precision. "This place is dangerous, even by my standards," Invalic muttered. Jacob sat beside him, nervously fidgeting with the straps on his backpack. "Define dangerous. Like don't eat the local food dangerous or run for your life dangerous." Invalic shot him a look. "Both. Keep your wits about you, and stay close. We're here to lose any bounty hunters who might be tracking us." "Got it," Jacob said, though his voice quivered slightly. The docking bay was dark and damp, the sound of dripping water echoing through the metallic walls. As they stepped out, Jacob glanced around nervously. Aliens of all kinds loitered nearby, their eyes following the pair with thinly veiled curiosity, or malice. "You don't think Charon sent someone after us, do you?" Jacob whispered. Invalic growled low in his throat. "Charon, bounty hunters, pirates. Take your pick. Everyone wants the artifact. And now, they want you too." Their first stop was a shady cantina nestled between towering skyscrapers. The air was thick with smoke and the sound of alien chatter. Invalic strode to the bar, his presence commanding respect, or fear. Jacob trailed behind, trying to look inconspicuous. "I need information," Invalic told the bartender, a slimy alien with 4 arms. He slid a small stack of credits across the counter. The bartender eyed the money, then glanced at Jacob. "You brought a human here. Brave move, or stupid." Before Invalic could reply, a loud crash erupted behind them. A hulking reptilian alien had overturned a table, pointing directly at Jacob. "There he is, the human with the artifact," the reptile roared. The entire cantina went silent. Then chaos erupted. Invalic reacted. The journey from Daxia 5 to their next location was long and silent. The Iron Fang cut through the vast emptiness of space, its engines humming steadily as the stars streaked past. Jacob sat in the co-pilot's seat, his hands nervously tapping on the controls in front of him, though he knew he had no idea how to fly the ship. Invalic was at the helm, his sharp eyes scanning the stars with a focus that spoke of years of experience. "I still don't get it," Jacob said finally, breaking the silence. "Why are they after me? I didn't even do anything." And Valak gave a low growl but didn't look at him. "You're too good at doing nothing. You activated that artifact, and now everyone's interested. The humans, your species. It's not just about your instincts, it's something else." "Something else? What are you talking about?" Jacob asked, confused. "You humans are unpredictable. You think outside the box. Most species rely on logic and patterns. But you," and Valak paused for a moment, considering his words, "you don't think like anyone else, and that makes you dangerous." Jacob blinked. "Dangerous? I'm not dangerous. I just—" He was interrupted by the ship's alarm system. "BEKP, BEK." Valak's claws flew over the controls. "We've got company. 2 ships closing in fast." Jacob looked out the viewport, squinting against the stars. 2 enemy vessels were coming into view, their sleek, black designs cutting through the void. They were Vrexian ships, identical to Valak's own, and they had clearly been tailing them. "Looks like Charon sent backup," Valak muttered under his breath. "Brace yourself. We're going to have to fight our way out of this." Jacob's heart pounded in his chest. "What do I do?" he asked, panic rising in his voice. And Valak turned to face him with a rare, serious expression. "Just stay calm. Do what I tell you. I need you to handle the weapon systems." Jacob's eyes widened. "Me? You want me to shoot? I don't even know how." "You'll learn quickly. If you don't, we're dead." With trembling hands, Jacob nodded, and Valak swiftly guided the ship into a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding a blast from the pursuing ships. The enemy vessels closed in, weapons charging. "Hit the red button on the console," Valak barked. Jacob scrambled to follow his instructions. His fingers found the button, and he slammed it. The ship shuddered as powerful turrets on the Iron Fang roared to life, blasting at the enemy ships. "That's it. Fire again," Valak shouted. Jacob, now fully focused, began firing with wild determination. He missed a few shots, but one of the enemy ships exploded in a brilliant flare of light. Jacob's jaw dropped. "I did that." Valak grinned, though it was a cold expression. "You're learning quickly, human." The remaining enemy ship turned to retreat, but Valak pursued it, firing a final blast that tore through its engines. The ship erupted in a fiery explosion, leaving nothing but debris floating in space. As the dust settled, Jacob slumped back in his seat, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "I can't believe I did that." "You did well," Valak said, his voice almost approving. He glanced at Jacob, the first hint of respect in his eyes. "You might just be more valuable than I thought." Jacob smiled, though he still felt the adrenaline rushing through him. "So I'm not just a cute sidekick, huh?" Valak looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "No, you're something much more." For the first time since meeting Jacob, Valak felt a flicker of something other than frustration. Maybe, just maybe, having this human around wasn't the worst thing that had happened to him. The Iron Fang drifted through the void of space, its hull still warm from the recent battle. Jacob sat in the co-pilot seat, absently fiddling with the controls, his mind racing. He couldn't believe what had just happened. One moment, he was fumbling through a simple mission, and the next, he was fighting off 2 armed ships like a seasoned soldier. It didn't make sense. How was he so good at it? Valak, however, was less surprised. He'd been keeping a close eye on Jacob ever since the first mission, noticing the human's uncanny ability to think quickly and react even faster. But he didn't have time to dwell on it. The bounty hunters weren't the only ones on their tail now. The situation had escalated. "We've been tracked," Valak said, his voice grave. "I can feel it." Jacob snapped to attention, his heart racing again. "Tracked? By who?" "A group called the Syndicate. They're a network of powerful individuals who collect rare artifacts and—" "Individuals," Invalak explained, his tone darkening. "They've been looking for you ever since you activated that artifact. They know what you can do now." Jacob swallowed hard. "You mean they want to capture me?" "Yes," Invalak replied, his 4 eyes narrowing. "And they'll stop at nothing to get you." Jacob shifted uneasily in his seat, the weight of his situation sinking in. He was just a regular guy, an ordinary human. He never asked for any of this, yet now his life was under constant threat. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the galaxy's eyes on him. The next few hours were tense. Invalak kept the Iron Fang on high alert, constantly weaving between asteroid fields and hiding in the shadows of dead space. Jacob, still uneasy but more focused now, sat beside him, occasionally glancing at the radar screens. "We need to make contact with a friend," Invalak said after a long silence, his eyes scanning the stars. "Someone who can help us hide. The syndicate is too large. We need allies." Jacob nodded. "Who's this friend?" Invalak hesitated. "A smuggler named Vera. She's not someone you want to owe a favor to, but she's good at disappearing people." Hours later, they found themselves on the outskirts of a dark, desolate moon. The surface was pocked with craters and covered in swirling clouds of dust. As they touched down, Jacob could see the faint outline of a small base ahead, a place that looked as if it hadn't seen life in years. "Stay close," Invalak warned, stepping out of the ship. "Vera isn't exactly trustworthy." Jacob followed him, unease creeping up his spine. "Just another day in the galaxy, right?" Invalak shot him a sideways glance. "You've got no idea." The smuggler's base was quiet, too quiet. The sound of their boots against the metal floor echoed through the abandoned halls. They'd reached a small room at the center of the base, where a figure stood waiting. Vera. She was tall, wearing dark leather and sporting a set of glowing tattoos across her arms. Her sharp green eyes flicked from Invalak to Jacob, sizing them both up. "I heard you were in trouble," she said with a grin that didn't reach her eyes. "And I'm here to collect." "Just get us out of here, Vera," Invalak growled. "The syndicate's on our tail." Vera studied Jacob for a moment, then shrugged. "Fine, but it's not going to be free." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "What's the price?" Vera smirked. "You don't want to know." As the ship's engines roared to life, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that their situation had just gotten even more complicated. They weren't just running from one group anymore. They were running from everyone. And somehow, Jacob had become the most wanted person in the galaxy. The Iron Fang sped through the stars, racing past distant planets and asteroid fields as Vera piloted them toward the outer rim. The ship was quiet now, the tension in the air thick enough to be felt. Jacob sat beside Invalak, his mind still spinning from everything that had happened. He had never imagined that a simple decision, touching an ancient artifact, could spiral into this kind of chaos. The stars blurred past the window as the ship entered the edge of a dark nebula, the perfect place to hide. "You've got to tell me, Invalak," Jacob said after a long pause, his voice uneasy. "What's so special about me? I mean, I'm just a regular guy. Why does everyone want me so badly?" Invalak shifted in his seat, his glowing eyes reflecting the starlight. "It's not just you, Jacob. It's your species. Humans are rare, unpredictable. And your mind, your instincts, they're something no one has ever seen before." Jacob blinked. "I don't know if I should be flattered or scared by that." "You should be both," Invalak replied grimly. "The Syndicate isn't the only one interested in you. There are other factions, galactic leaders, corporations, even ancient civilizations, all searching for someone like you." Jacob sat back, trying to wrap his head around the idea that he was some kind of prize. He was just a regular guy. He never wanted to be part of some galactic game. Hours passed, and the ship finally emerged from the nebula into a remote system. Vera had set course for an ancient research facility hidden on a forgotten planet. She said it would be the safest place to hide, but something about it made Jacob uneasy. "We're here," Vera said as she brought the ship in for a landing. The planet was barren, its surface covered in craggy mountains and deep, shadow-filled valleys. The base was a cluster of old research buildings, abandoned for years. The walls were covered in rust, and the air felt stagnant. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find safety, but Jacob knew they had little choice. "We can't stay here long," Vera warned as she led them through the rusted corridors of the base. "The Syndicate will have found our trail by now. We'll have to act fast." "What do we do?" Jacob asked, trying to ignore the unease creeping up his spine. "We find what we came here for," Vera said. She pulled out a map of the facility and pointed to a section deep in the center. "There's an old vault here. It's said to contain artifacts, tech that's older than any of us. If we can get to it, we can hide long enough for the heat to die down." And Valak's eyes narrowed. "You think the Syndicate doesn't already know about this place?" Vyra gave him a sharp look. "Of course they do. But they're not the only ones interested in this vault. If we can unlock its secrets, we'll have the upper hand." Jacob frowned. "Unlock its secrets? How? What exactly are we looking for?" Vera smiled darkly. "Something that will make the Syndicate, and everyone else, forget about you. It's risky, but it's our only shot." And Valak turned to Jacob, his expression unreadable. "You're the one who activated the artifact. You'll need to do the same here." Jacob's heart skipped a beat. "Wait, you want me to open this vault?" "Your instincts are why we're here," Valak said, his tone more serious than ever. "You might be the only one who can do it." Jacob took a deep breath, trying to ignore the panic rising inside him. "Okay, I'll do it. But if this goes wrong..." "It won't," Vera cut in. "Just trust me, you'll be fine." As they made their way deeper into the facility, Jacob felt a weight on his shoulders that he hadn't felt before. The galaxy had never seemed so big and so dangerous. And now he wasn't just running from bounty hunters. He was running from everyone who wanted the power that his mind could unlock. But the real question lingered in the back of his mind. If they unlocked the vault, what would they find inside? And would it really make everything go away? Or would it only make things worse? The facility was dark and quiet, the only sound the echo of their footsteps as Jacob and Valak and Vera made their way down the narrow hallways. The walls of the ancient base were covered in dust and faded symbols from forgotten civilizations. The air was thick with the scent of old technology and rust. Jacob could feel the weight of the place pressing on him, as if it were alive, watching them. "Stay alert," Valak muttered, his glowing eyes scanning every corner. "We're not alone here." Jacob nodded but felt uneasy. The deeper they went into the facility, the more he realized how little he understood about the forces chasing them. The Syndicate wasn't the only threat. They were only part of something much bigger, something ancient, and it seemed that Jacob, without even knowing it, had become the key to unlocking it all. Vyra led them to a heavily reinforced door at the end of the hall. "This is it," she said, her voice low but confident. "The vault." And Valak stepped forward, his large form blocking the door. "We'll need to move quickly. The Syndicate won't give us much time." "Let's get it open," Jacob said, trying to push down the fear that had begun to creep into his chest. He stepped up to the door, staring at the strange, shifting symbols that covered it. It was like nothing he'd seen before. It wasn't just alien. It was old. Older than any civilization he had encountered. Vyra handed him a small device. "This will help you decipher the symbols. Just trust your instincts." Jacob took the device and ran his fingers over it, watching as it lit up with faint pulses of light. The symbols seemed to come to life in his mind, swirling around, forming patterns he couldn't quite understand but somehow felt drawn to. "I've never seen anything like this," Jacob murmured. "It's like it's alive." "Just focus," Vera urged. As Jacob touched the symbols, a low hum filled the room. The door began to shift, its ancient mechanisms grinding to life. Jacob's heart raced. This was it. This was the moment that could change everything. But just as the door began to open, a loud crash echoed through the hall. Someone was coming. Valak was the first to react, his rifle in his hands before the sound even fully registered. "Get back," he barked, shoving Jacob behind him. Vera quickly drew a small energy blade, her eyes scanning the shadows. A group of heavily armored figures appeared at the end of the hallway, their helmets reflecting the dim light. Syndicate enforcers. They were here. "Looks like our time is up," Valak growled, positioning himself between the enforcers and Jacob. Jacob's mind raced. They were outnumbered, and these weren't just random thugs. They were highly trained mercenaries, the best of the syndicate. They would never back down. They had to escape. But just as the enforcers took a step forward, a loud explosion rocked the corridor, throwing everyone off balance. The walls shook, and a sudden flash of light filled the room. "What the?" Jacob gasped, stumbling to his feet. From the smoke, a figure emerged, a tall, lean alien with a familiar face. It was an old friend of Valak's, someone Jacob never expected to see. "Vera," the figure said, his voice smooth but with a hint of amusement. "I see you've made some new friends." "Trent," Valak muttered, his voice laced with both surprise and annoyance. "What are you doing here?" Trent smirked, pulling a blaster from his side. "Saving your skins, of course." The syndicate enforcers looked at each other, clearly unsure of what to do. Trent's reputation preceded him. He was a smuggler and rogue, known for slipping through the tightest situations. "I suggest you leave before I do something I'll regret," Trent added, his tone still light but dangerous. The enforcers hesitated, clearly outmatched. With a growl, their leader signaled for them to retreat, disappearing into the smoke. Jacob blinked in disbelief. "Who was that?" "A friend of yours." Valak nodded, though his expression was hard to read. "He's an ally. Of sorts. He owes me a few favors. But this doesn't change anything. We still need to get inside that vault." Vera nodded, her face hardening. "No more distractions. Let's finish this." As they turned back to the vault door, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that they were closer than ever to uncovering something that could change everything. The syndicate wasn't just after him. They were after something much bigger, something buried deep in the heart of the vault. And Jacob was starting to realize that he might be the only one who could unlock it. The air was thick with tension as the group stood before the ancient vault. Jacob's fingers still tingled from the strange symbols he had unlocked, but there was no time to think about it. The sounds of distant explosions and the rush of footsteps echoed down the hall. The syndicate's forces weren't far behind. "We don't have long," Vera said, her voice sharp with urgency. "Once we open this, there's no going back." Jacob nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. The vault door was finally open, revealing a dark, cold room filled with high-tech equipment and strange artifacts. But it wasn't the room itself that made Jacob's skin crawl. It was the feeling that something was watching him, waiting for him to make the next move. He stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The space was filled with rows of alien devices, some glowing faintly, others humming with a mysterious energy. In the center of the room, there was a pedestal, and atop it rested a small orb, pulsating with a bright blue light. It seemed to call to him, its light flickering in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Is that it?" Jacob asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Valak, his sharp eyes scanning the room for threats, gave a small nod. "That's the key. The syndicate wants it. But you're the only one who can activate it." Jacob approached the pedestal cautiously, his hand hovering just above the orb. The air seemed to grow heavier as he reached for it. He had no idea what would happen once he touched it. Would it unlock something more dangerous? Would it be the end of them all? Before he could make a decision, a loud crash shook the room. The door to the vault slammed shut, and a familiar voice echoed from behind them. "I told you, you wouldn't escape," the voice sneered. Jacob spun around. It was Charon, the Ralith who had been after him from the beginning. He was flanked by several of his guards, their weapons trained on the group. "You should have stayed out of this," Charon continued, his eyes gleaming with greed. "But now you've led me right to the prize." "You're too late, Charon," Valak growled, stepping between the smugglers and the Ralith. "We're taking this." "Oh, I think not," Charon said, raising his hand. "You've been a thorn in my side for far too long, and I'm tired of playing games." Without warning, his guards opened fire. The room erupted in chaos as energy blasts filled the air. Jacob dove behind a nearby console, his heart racing. The sound of blaster fire was deafening, and he could feel the heat of each near miss. And Valak returned fire with deadly precision, his rifle blasting through the air, taking down one of Charon's guards. Vera was close behind, her energy blade flashing as she cut through the enemies who dared get too close. "Jacob now," Valak shouted, his voice urgent. Jacob glanced at the pedestal again. The orb seemed to be calling to him, urging him to act. Taking a deep breath, he lunged forward, grabbing the orb. The moment his fingers made contact with it, a surge of energy shot through him, his body shaking from the power that flowed into him. The entire room trembled as a pulse of light erupted from the orb, sending Charon and his guards stumbling backward. The ground cracked beneath them, and the air hummed with a strange ancient energy. The vault walls began to shift and rearrange, revealing a hidden doorway in the back of the room. Charon screamed in frustration, trying to regain control of the situation. But it was too late. The vault was opening, and whatever was inside was beyond his reach now. "Jacob," Valak called again, his voice urgent as the room continued to shake. "We need to go. Now." Jacob could hardly think, still reeling from the power surging through him. But he didn't need to be told twice. He turned and ran for the newly revealed exit, with Valak and Vera close behind. Behind them, Charon cursed, ordering his remaining guards to pursue them. But the vault's walls were closing, sealing off the way they had come. They barely made it out of the facility before the entire structure began to collapse. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a loud explosion sent dust and debris flying in every direction. The Iron Fang was waiting for them just outside, the engines already running. Jacob climbed into the ship, breathless, his heart still racing. And Valak was already at the controls, and Vera quickly joined him at the co-pilot's seat. As the Iron Fang soared into the sky, Jacob looked back at the wreckage below. He had no idea what he had just unleashed, but it was clear that the galaxy would never be the same again. The stars streaked by as the Iron Fang raced through space, leaving the crumbling facility behind. The last few moments had been a blur. Explosions, flashing lights, and the urgent sound of Valak's voice calling for them to get to the ship. Jacob sat in the back of the ship, still feeling the powerful surge of energy from the orb, his head spinning from everything that had just happened. "That was too close," Jacob said, rubbing his temples as he leaned back in his seat. "What was that orb? Why did it react to me like that?" Valak, sitting at the controls, glanced over his shoulder. "I don't know," he said, his voice low and serious. "But whatever it was no accident. That orb holds power beyond anything we've encountered. You're connected to it now, and that makes you both a target and a key." Jacob frowned. "A target? I already was a target. I don't need to be a bigger one." "You're more than just a target now," Valak said. "That orb, it's not just technology. It's part of something far larger, a hidden force that can change the course of the galaxy." Jacob shivered. He didn't want to think about that. He wasn't some hero or chosen one. He was just a guy who had gotten caught up in something far bigger than himself. And now, with the power of that orb inside him, he was scared. He didn't know what it meant or how to control it. As the ship continued its journey into deep space, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His connection to the orb was stronger than ever. He could almost feel its presence inside him, its pull, its weight. And with that weight came the realization that there was something more at play, something that had been hidden for centuries. Vira, who had been quietly working on the ship's console, looked over at Jacob. "You're not going to be able to outrun this forever, you know," she said softly. "The Syndicate won't give up, and there are worse things than them out there." Jacob met her gaze, his stomach tightening. "What are you talking about?" "The power you've just unlocked," Vera continued, her voice low. "It's the kind of power that some people will do anything to control, including the lives of anyone who stands in their way." Valak turned in his seat, his expression hard. "There are some things in the galaxy that should never be touched. But we've already made that mistake. Now, we either find a way to control this power or risk losing everything." Jacob swallowed, his throat dry. He had no idea how to control something this dangerous. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that keeping the orb could be a mistake. The only way to truly protect the galaxy and the people he cared about was to make sure no one could use it. "We need to end this," Jacob said, his voice firm. He stood up from his seat, his eyes determined. "I have to get rid of it." Valak raised an eyebrow. "Get rid of it? Do you have any idea what you're talking about?" "I don't care about the power," Jacob said, shaking his head. "But I can't let it fall into the wrong hands. If the Syndicate gets their hands on it, or anyone else for that matter." His voice trailed off. Vira leaned forward, her expression softening. "You're not the only one who has to make sacrifices. We all have to live with the choices we make." Jacob looked at her, his mind racing. He knew what needed to be done. "I can't keep running. I have to end this once and for all." He turned to Valak. "I need your help." Valak's gaze softened, just for a moment. "You've got it, human. But you'll need to be sure. There's no turning back once we do this." Jacob nodded, the weight of the decision settling deep inside him. He had no choice. If he didn't act now, the galaxy would fall into chaos. The orb, the power inside him, it had to be stopped, for everyone's sake. As they prepared to reach their destination, Jacob knew the hardest part was yet to come. Whatever happened next, he was ready to face it. He just hoped that when the time came, he would be able to make the right choice. The final destination loomed ahead, a forgotten moon, untouched by time. It was the only place that might hold the answers to ending the threat of the orb. The Iron Fang glided into orbit, its engines humming softly as Jacob and Valak and Vera stood in the ship's cockpit, staring at the barren surface below. "We're here," Valak said, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying a flicker of unease. "This is where it ends, human." Jacob nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of his decision pressed down on him. Destroying the orb meant a sacrifice, one he hadn't yet fully accepted. But it was the only way to ensure that the Syndicate, or anyone else, could never use it to destroy everything he knew. "This place," Vera said softly, looking down at the moon below, "it's where the ancients sealed away their greatest mistake. The power of that orb isn't meant for anyone, not even you." Jacob turned to face her. "But I'm the only one who can do this. I have to end it." "We all do," Vera replied, her eyes hard. "No one can make this decision alone." The Iron Fang descended toward a dark valley, where the remnants of an ancient structure lay hidden beneath centuries of dust. This place had been abandoned long ago, a forgotten temple where secrets were kept. As they landed, Jacob could feel the orb's power pulsing inside him, urging him forward. Valak led the way, his rifle at the ready, his sharp eyes scanning for any threats. Vera followed close behind, her face set in a determined expression. Jacob lingered for a moment, staring at the door ahead of them, his hand resting on the orb still secured in his pack. "This is it," Jacob said, swallowing hard. "Once we go in, there's no going back." Valak turned to him. "I've seen many things in my life, human. But if you're sure about this, I'm with you, for whatever comes next." Vira nodded as well, though her eyes betrayed the same uncertainty that Jacob felt. Sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. Inside the temple, the air was cold and heavy with the weight of centuries. The walls were adorned with ancient symbols, ones that Jacob could almost understand, as though they were meant for him to decode. It was eerie, like being in the presence of something much older and more powerful than he had ever known. In the center of the room, there was a pedestal, just like the one where the orb had once rested. Jacob moved forward slowly, every step echoing in the vast space. He could feel the orb's presence, its call growing stronger the closer he got. He reached into his pack and pulled out the orb, its blue light flickering with intensity. As he placed it on the pedestal, the entire room seemed to tremble. "This is the end," Jacob whispered. The orb began to glow brightly, its energy pulsating in waves. Jacob could feel the power surging through him once again. But this time, it wasn't a pull. It was a choice. "I'm ready," he said quietly, his hand resting above the orb. A voice, ancient and deep, echoed in his mind. "You are the chosen one. Your will shapes the future of the galaxy." Jacob clenched his fist. "Not anymore," he said firmly. "I don't want to be the key. I just want to stop it." In that moment, Jacob made his choice. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to connect fully with the orb, but instead of using its power, he sacrificed it. He willed the energy to dissipate, to fade, so that the dangerous force inside it could no longer control him or anyone else. A bright flash of light erupted from the pedestal, and the ground trembled violently. Jacob felt the surge of energy leaving him, draining the power from the orb as it began to disintegrate. It was painful, but necessary. When the light faded and the shaking stopped, Jacob was standing alone in the center of the room, the orb gone. He felt empty. But at the same time, a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Valak and Vera rushed forward, their faces filled with concern. "Did it work?" Vera asked, her voice breathless. Jacob nodded, the faintest of smiles crossing his lips. "It's over. The galaxy is safe, at least for now." Valak grinned, clapping Jacob on the back. "You did it, human. You saved us all." For the first time since this crazy journey began, Jacob felt a sense of peace. He wasn't a hero. He was just a guy who made the right choice at the right time. And for now, that was enough. As the Iron Fang soared back into space, Jacob looked out at the stars, knowing that the future was uncertain, but for the first time, it was his future, humanity's future, to shape.